Okay, so let's get started. People will be coming in, so you're very welcome. I'm going to hand over to Veronica Ryan just to introduce us to her deep listening and to Cloughjordan Ecovillage. So over to you, Veronica.
Hello, everyone. My name is Veronica. I'm Education Officer here in Cloughjordan Ecovillage. Sustainable Projects Ireland, the educational charity that founded Cloughjordan Ecovillage, was established nearly over 20 years ago. For the last 15 years, we've been based here in Cloughjordan, building and developing an ecovillage that serves as an educational enterprise and research resource for all. It's a sustainable development project. We're a living community and a destination for learning. With over 100 members, we're people-focused, working together using consensus decision-making and cooperative principles. We describe ourselves as a living lab, an ecosystem for innovation. You'll find here high-performance housing, community-owned district heating system, woodland and biodiversity areas, and a community farm, and many eco-enterprises. In 2014, Cloughjordan Ecovillages was measured as having an ecological footprint of 2.03 global hectares. This is the lowest recorded ecological footprint for an Irish settlement. We represent a thriving, vibrant community of people committed to pioneering change.
Thanks, Veronica. So we're going to move over to Peter Kirby to introduce what we're doing today in our deep dive, deep listening series, our second one. Our first was on Irish and ecology. So let's hand over to Peter Kirby to introduce Kim Stanley Robinson and what we're going to be doing in this conversation. Peter.
Yes, we're Gus Fáilte Roibh Galéir Ecofobal Cloughjordan. You're all very welcome to Cloughjordan Ecovillage, and we're delighted today to have as our guest on the second of our deep listening webinars, Kim Stanley Robinson, the world-renowned science fiction author who has written, by my count, 17 books, and his 18th is coming out next month in October, The Ministry for the Future, the cover of which you can see there on screen. So Stan is, as I said, a world-famous science fiction writer, born in Illinois, but he moved to California as a very young person and has continued to live there most of his life, with a brief interlude in Boston University for his master's, went back for his PhD in California, and has lived also in Switzerland. That's relevant because much of the Ministry for the Future is actually based in Zurich. And today, our surprise for Stan is that while Mary Murphy, an Irish woman who heads up the Ministry for the Future, is the protagonist of his book, we have our own Mary Murphy as a respondent to Stan's conversation today. And I'll introduce Mary later when Stan and myself have had our conversation. So before starting, I just want to return a little bit to the links that we've had in Cloughjordan Ecovillage with Stan, because his books treat of a future that hasn't yet come to be, in some cases a very distant future, but in the case of the Ministry for the Future, a very immediate future, the forthcoming decades, and how humanity hopes to implement the Paris Agreement. So it's absolutely relevant to the concerns that motivated us to establish Cloughjordan Ecovillage and are the main concerns of our activities, namely to model how we move and transition to a low-carbon society. Stan's work, of course, deals with this in great detail in some cases. How do we actually move from where we're at to address the multiple challenges, particularly the challenge of climate change, which has exercised him for a long, long time. And so we were delighted to welcome Stan here to the Ecovillage in 2015. That was a very, very fruitful meeting, and I think he came at a time of a lot of difficulties in our community. So it was a wonderfully inspiring visit from Stan that has lived on with us. So Stan, we're delighted to have you, if only in a virtual way, in this COVID-19 era, to again talk about not so much about the book, but about the big issues that are facing us all, the issues of humanity. And just before we start, just to say that our local Sheila na Gig bookshop itself established by eco-villagers here in Cloughjordan, is offering is ordering the book for anybody who wants to send them an email. They will send the book once it's out next month. So please, that's a lesson of support your local booksellers, particularly in this time when global corporations are unfortunately sucking the economic and social lifeblood out of so many of our communities. And that's, we try to use every opportunity to try to relocalize economic activity in our local community. So Stan, we welcome you here, and just to start off, I go back to this Mary Murphy, not our Mary Murphy, whom we'll introduce in a moment, but Mary Murphy, the protagonist of your book. And while the book covers a vast range of subjects, at its heart is the story of this Irish woman who heads up this UN agency, which has the Ministry for the Future, based in Zurich in Switzerland. And I think what it brings forth to us is the importance of individual leadership and courageous and ambitious leadership to make this move towards a low carbon society. So my first question to you today is, how important do you think individual leadership is? After all, it's a discourse. The discourse about climate change is a discourse where often technologies are given priority. So let's focus in on the importance you attach to individual leadership and where you identify that leadership in today's world.
Well, thank you, Peter, for that question and for having me. And thanks to Davey and Veronica. I really remember fondly my visit to the Ecovillage in 2015, and it's really good to be back even virtually. And I hope for a return in person as we get past the COVID years. Individual leadership, I think, is overemphasized, and I think maybe one of the things going on is that because I'm writing a novel, I need characters, because we really read novels for the characters that you get to know, to have a sort of virtual or fictional telepathy where you're inside someone else's mind, and that's a vivid experience when done right. So if you try to tell a social story and even a global story where it takes thousands of people working in solidarity in a collective way, which I think is really what it does take, you still, for the novel's sake, have to focus in on characters. And so it's also true that sometimes this is often the point of a novel. A relatively ordinary bureaucrat, just a person with a job, by accident gets stuck into a position of historical importance where what they do matters as a kind of a linchpin moment or a crux where things could fall one way or another, and the person has to act. Well, that's a story one can tell as a novelist, and it happens in the world as well. And every once in a while, the confluence of a good person trying to do their best, like anyone would, is in the position to be able to leverage something. So I think this is my take on why it comes out. Most novels need a protagonist. I wanted a bureaucrat because this is the Paris Agreement novel. I wanted a European. And then I wanted a woman, because so many of the powerful bureaucrats coming forward are women, and it's good to emphasize that. And I've also met and had a lot of instructional conversations with Rita Caldwell, who was the director of the National Science Foundation in the United States for 6 years. She taught me a lot, and I've used this kind of character before in my Washington, D.C. trilogy. So then, to tell you the truth, I wanted also someone whose language was English, so I didn't have to pretend that I was translating, and yet I didn't want an English woman. And my mom's parents, their parents came from Ireland, and I am an admirer of Mary Robinson, and we share the same last name. I've taken an interest. So I spiraled in to this Mary Murphy character. And I'm thinking also of Christine Lagrange or Angela Merkel, European women who are in positions of power, but I don't think that they are extraordinary people. Maybe they're exemplary people. They're doing the right thing in the right spot, and they are ambitious and obviously strong-willed and capable. But I don't think it takes anything extraordinary. It's just people like us getting into positions where they can do the right thing at the right time.
And do you see this leadership, the sort of courageous and ambitious leadership that in your book Mary Murphy does offer, it seems to me, do you see this replicated in today's world?
Well, yes, to a certain extent, those women whom I mentioned and leaders all over the world, and I'm particularly impressed by the writing of and the institutionalizing of the Paris Agreement. To me, this is one of the more amazing events. It will be in all the world history books written centuries from now, assuming they do that then. It was really important. It's possible that it may turn out to be something like the League of Nations and in the end look like a failure of sorts. But the fact that it got written at all was a cohort of international diplomats. So they talk about the bureaucracy. Well, okay, but maybe the technocracy is another word that one can use, because often people have scientific or technical expertise that is brought to bear in various legislative capacities, or they're working for government. So bureaucrats, technocrats, and also diplomats who are in the foreign services of their various countries. So they're all working for government and for science in a way. They have an expertise. They gathered together and 178 nations signed on to this Paris Agreement, which to get it passed began weak and small. And there are problems with it that my book explores, whether it will get implemented or not, etc. Nevertheless, the actual writing of the agreement, which is worth reading in full, it's quite impressive. It worked very hard on establishing climate justice, climate equity, questions of equity across the international world, between the developed world and the developing world, between the empires and the ex-empires and the countries that were exploited. So it's actually a stupendously impressive document, and we're supporting. That's of course very much up in the air as a political and a practical question as to whether we'll act on it well. However, these were leaders. So I think there's a bit of I mean, it's certainly true in my country, there's a bit of a soap opera going on at the top, because we do focus on characters like in novels. There's an overemphasis on the national leadership as such, as in our country in particular, a bad soap opera, boring and repetitive, melodramatic, and disguising the truth of the situation in terms of the real work getting done and the real work that needs to get done. So that class of leadership, I tend to look under to the what you might call a civil service, to the people doing the real work and advising. By and large, they are the ones telling the political leaders who get all the headlines and all of the TV time what to think and what to say, how to, or at least how to craft what they believe into viable actions. It can go wrong, and the United States right now is a spectacular example of it going wrong, but that's all the more reason to focus in on where the real work is getting done.
Very interesting. Now, just to move on to, I suppose, some of the aspects of the book that for us in Cloughjordan Ecovillage stand out very strongly, it is the community-based initiatives that loom very large. So you mentioned permaculture, you mentioned biochar, regenerative agriculture, garden cities, cooperatives, particularly Mondragon. I was delighted to see Mondragon playing a certain starring role, habitat corridors, rewilding. I mean, wonderful ideas, the ideas that we often talk about and try to implement in so many ways, in the ways in which we tend our 67 acres here in the Ecovillage. So in the bigger picture of moving to a low carbon society, of addressing the really grave and urgent issue of biodiversity loss, just how important are these community-based initiatives in your view?
Well, I think they're crucial. And what's extremely important about them is that they're actionable now, that ordinary people who have not joined the civil service or gotten into politics can do real work on establishing and making them happen now. And also the decarbonization of our technologies and of our atmosphere, which is going to be the big project of this century, is an all hands on deck type situation where there's no one thing we can do that will solve the problem outright. Take, for example, reforestation. We've burned millions of years of forests into the atmosphere. So if we were to, as a hypothetical example, reforest the entire surface of the earth, that would not draw down enough carbon in itself to mitigate the carbon that we've burned in these last 2 centuries. No one solution will work, and therefore all of them are worth pursuing, and many of them are local and community-based. Linking up of habitat corridors, protecting the wild animals that are in your specific region. It helps to have top-down instructions, regulations, laws, and financial aid to enact these projects. But the truth is that it's not illegal to protect animals now, and all of these things are actionable now. They're legal. They oftentimes aren't even stupendously expensive, but they are expensive in the sense that there are always costs to the benefits that you get. And so there needs to be top-down understanding and financial compensation for the real work being done in communities. So I guess in my novel and in my thinking in general, I always like to emphasize both the bottom up, the community work, the things you can really do in your local region right now they're all well and good, but we need to change the top 2. And that also is a bottom up effort that needs solidarity from people that you don't have control over the way you have control over your local environment. But it is crucial that we change the working financial rules of the world also, along with the local efforts.
So that issue of buy-in, I mean, we really need buy-in by humanity as a whole, and that's one of the big blockages that so few people seem really to understand the gravity of what we're facing and the radical nature of the steps that we have to take at all levels in our societies, our economies, our value system, etc. And I suppose one of the striking features in the Ministry for the Future is, and as time goes on, I suppose it's easier and easier to write about this, but you open with this devastating heat wave in India and the impacts of it. You describe so graphically that it would scare anybody, particularly people that really haven't realized the devastating future that awaits us. So I suppose the question is, do you hope that by being able to describe in this way as a novelist, I mean, in a way in which those of us who write more academically about these issues could never describe, that you could really awaken people, awaken the consciousness of your readers to the gravity of what we're facing into?
Yes, that's my hope. That's really what the novel is trying to do always, and science fiction has a particular angle, being the future and inherently politicized, trying to convey potentialities that are good or bad is an inherently political act. I'm terrified that the first scene of my novel will come true in this decade. The wet bulb temperature, which is a combination of heat and humidity, is rising as the global average temperature rises, and we're now seeing these fatal combinations of heat and humidity appear briefly around the world. And it's not just the tropics that are in danger, it's anywhere that has a combination of heat and humidity as a potentiality. One of the hottest wet bulb temperatures ever recorded was right near Chicago, and the US Gulf Coast is very susceptible. And of course, the Gangetic Plain of India has a very big potential for this weather problem and a lot of people, and not a great energy infrastructure. So that I did want to try to throw that imaginary scene where the reader is experiencing time travel across space and time to the near future in India, and also telepathy, going into the mind of a young American man as an aid worker, a kind of witness to it, so that I could write it out of my own, with more verisimilitude, you might say, an observer of this, but also a participant, that I wanted to engage in the discursive battle, which I think is really what you're talking about that's going on in the world today, a discursive battle to tell the story that will convince enough people to do the right things for the generations to come. So yes, this was a kind of a slap to the head or a cannon shot next to your ear. It was a dreadful week or month's worth of work to write it, and I'm terrified that it might happen. But we're headed that way, and so it's worth saying. And it's worth doing more than saying. It was worth trying to drag myself and then my readers through the experience to indicate how bad it would be. And then the rest of the novel, I have to say, has to stick with India. Because if it happens in India first, and it could be Indonesia, it could be the US Gulf Coast, where it happens first, that nation will be radicalized. And then things might change in interesting ways. And of course, India being 1/7 of humanity, 1 billion people, and a democracy, the world's largest democracy by far, that could be particularly interesting, and I wanted to stick with that. So the novel has an Indian strand that is wound through it.
Yes, I'm struck by the fact that that it's in India that you see really significant change happening at the political level later in the book. Perhaps there's a knock-on effect of a disaster like that with which you opened the book on the real politics, but I mean, that's to be seen in the future. I wanted to move on then to a very different topic, but an equally central one when we talk about these challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss, which is technology. I mean, in many ways, the discourse, particularly around climate change, has been a techno-optimistic discourse. In other words, a discourse that believes that technology is going to solve it for us, and we're going to find some magical ways that we can continue living the lives we live, while technology is going to resolve the ever greater carbon emissions that result from that. And as in all your books, I think that there are fascinating descriptions, like imaginative journeys into technological solutions, particularly the one of getting the oil companies to pump out the melting water at the bottom of the Antarctic ice cap to try to resolve the issue of the ice melting in the Antarctic. I mean, it's stunning, and you've done similar things in other books. However, I was very struck also by the fact, and I quote here from the book, that you caution in terms of technology, and this is a textual quote, that our tools are expressions of our intentions, and our systems are what drive history, not our tools. That seems to be contextualizing technology and putting the emphasis upon the fact that it's not the tools per se, but it's the wider systems and value systems that shape tools that are adequate to the task at hand. Can you expand on that? Am I getting this right? That you're, if you like, sort of, you're critiquing in some ways the techno-optimism of our dominant discourse, while recognizing that technologies are absolutely crucial, that they also have to reflect our wider value systems and social systems.
Yes, you've understood me correctly, and I can expand on it. We are a technological species. It's really our invention of tools back at the beginning that we co-evolved with to become human. So I would never want to speak against technology, but I've always been intent to enlarge the definition, and using computer analogy here to make it clear. Technology is not just the hardware. Technology is the software as well. And the moment that you admit that, then suddenly all systems come into play. You understand that language is a technology. You understand that justice and law are technologies. They're the software. And to me, the software is crucial. It is predominant in what hardware gets built. It comes after a decision that you want this or that. So the technology going forward in this century that needs the most rapid advancement, we call it political economy. And this, of course, is like a 19th century term. It's almost been forgotten. The hegemonic power of capitalism, of global capitalism as an overarching system by which we organize all of our efforts, is destructive to justice and to the biosphere. And so we need a new political economy more than any of the hardware, desperately. In fact, no hardware solution, and there are some interesting ones. Direct air capture. We are making gigantic vacuum cleaners that sucking air through will pull out the carbon dioxide. It sounds like a silver bullet fix. And it is, if it were the only thing employed, it would be, it wouldn't work. It needs to be integrated into a larger system so that in Ministry of the Future, they are indeed sucking water out from the bottom of the glaciers in Antarctica, which would slow them down and would be a great thing. That's hardware. But the big technological innovation is the carbon quantitative easing. In other words, finance. In other words, a radical revision of capitalism into some kind of post-capitalism in which you get paid for doing good things for the earth. And so a profit, which is a weird metric and highly unjust and destructive metric, and yet it's the only metric today. Capital will only go where the investment is profitable. So profit has to be redefined as what's good for the land, etc. And we do have this example of quantitative easing. The central banks created trillions of dollars, maybe $15 trillion from scratch to get us out of the mini depression of 2008. And then with this pandemic, there has also been quantitative easing spectacularly, and it has not destabilized our faith in money itself. So this is not my idea, but I've been following some economists who've been suggesting it, of quantitative easing that doesn't just get given to the private banks for them to loan in their usual way, but gets spent first in a Green New Deal type directed governmental spending for biosphere projects, for the kind of things that you're already doing in your eco-village, but on a much vaster scale, and getting recompensed for it outside of the ordinary profit system. That the first payment of this newly created money goes to doing the necessary work. So this is the main technological innovation in my novel.
Yeah, certainly the stuff on a carbon currency was mind-blowing for me. I was really taken with it, and the potential of it, and the role that Mary Murphy's meetings with the central bankers of the world played. Is all a scenario that is within the realm of possibility, I think, in today's world. However, if I can focus in on, I suppose, what lies behind that, and that you recognize in the book, that political power and the way in which political power is used is going to be crucial to making those changes that allow those technologies, in the wider way in which you interpret them, allows those technologies to be absolutely implemented. So change could happen by changing the laws, you say, but who holds power, you ask at one stage. Political power is one of those fossil words. I suppose what lies behind that, and that you recognize in the book, that political power and... sorry, I'm getting an echo. That's why I stopped talking for a moment. I was struck that while power, you do emphasize power as being central, and yet the political struggles at national level really don't feature, apart from a mention of a new political party emerging in India, which was fascinating, but it was more like just a flavor of what could happen. Now, we're sitting in a country here which has just seen the Green Party enter government with a very ambitious plan for government, with a plan to reduce carbon emissions by 7% annually. I'm not aware of any other government in the world that has pledged to such radical cuts annually. And secondly, of course, you live in a country which is, in terms of national politics, facing probably its most decisive and important presidential election, we could say, for the last, well, certainly in our lifetime, maybe, for the last 100 years. So my question is, how do you see that the role of national politics, which so often seems to block the sort of changes that we need? And in some ways, if you don't mind me saying so, in the book, you seem to just sort of get around that blockage without dealing with it.
Yeah, it would have to be a very long novel to address the different national situations adequately. And so I did have to finesse that and slide by it as being, the Paris Agreement shows that there's a somewhat delinked technocracy, and this would be true also of the central bankers, who have been deliberately delinked from their legislatures in order to keep money stable and outside the political churn. I come back to the discursive battle. In every country, the government exists on the sufferance of its populace believing in it. So I don't think it's right, I don't think it's precise to talk exactly about democracy. That's seen in China as just a word for Western domination of their system. But I think it's okay to talk about political representation. Do you feel that your government represents you in some way? And all around the world, the answer is often a no, that one's sense of political representation has been diminishing. So you see Brexit, you see in the European Union that the national governments have to then also coordinate with this this regional international government that's the European Union, so one feels less politically represented, perhaps. I'm just guessing, I'm not from there. In America, the amount of money that can be thrown in by vested interests, the oil industries, the rich, the extractive industries, the people in favor of the status quo of capitalism, they can throw in so much money into campaigning, an unlimited amount, that they can, to a certain extent, win the discursive battle. But, and in other countries, in China, you have to look at a very granular level to see that the China's Communist Party is only 100 million out of 1.4 billion people. They're riding a tiger. They need the populace to support them, and therefore they try to create the sense of political representation, which at the neighborhood level, at the level that you are working at the Ecovillage, in China can be quite extensive. So in every country, it's a different situation. And here's my point here. You need a working majority. You need to win the discursive battle enough to grab enough power in your national governmental system to get done the correct things. That's going to be different in every country, but it's the same ultimately. A working majority is all you need. You're not going to convince everybody. Although at the village level you can do your government by consensus, you yourself have seen it's awkward. And it's easier if you can get a 51% or 55% or 60% majority and then do things. And that's the case in most political systems as it is. So again, you come back to the importance of the discursive battle. Can you tell the story correctly enough that people out there listening, and of course this implies people are listening and that there is one single discourse space. All of this is not quite true anymore, but it's all you can do is to go out there and convince everybody that you can, that you've got an analysis of the situation that is safest for for the children. And that would be what I would say to anybody from any country, so that if I was in conversation with people in China, I would say roughly the same thing that I just said to you. I think it's the situation everywhere that you need a working majority. You need to convince enough people in the population that their political representation is doing what they want them to do, and then you go forward from there.
Before I go on, can I just say I've been asked to apologize for the fact that people who are watching us on YouTube are not seeing Stan directly. They're seeing, I think, me looking at Stan. So apologies about that. We are trying to fix it, and I hope at least you're able to follow the conversation in itself. It's not a beauty competition. So Stan, back to another question, which is a very stark question, I suppose. I was struck by the fact that you describe it in one part of the book, you call it a war for the earth. I suppose those of us who are activists in this space can identify with that. It is a war. It is a war in the sense that we are trying to save the planet and save the conditions on the planet that allow human civilization to flourish. You talk about a war against the carbon oligarchy, which identifies who the enemy is. And I love the term carbon oligarchy. In my view, it's a very, very useful term. I think I'll be using it. Do you really see us as being at war, Stan?
Well, we do have the concept of the Cold War from the post-war period. And the Cold War always was flaring up out on the periphery and turning into a hot war in which people got killed. So I feel that the carbon oligarchy would not hesitate to hire people to commit violence, to hold on to their power over really the world's population. That there's not going to be a moment of enlightenment in which carbon oligarchs realize they're destroying the biosphere for future generations, and that they will all repent and change their ways. I don't trust that scenario as coming to pass. And so let's put it this way, we're in a fight. It hopefully stays at the political level and at the level of the discursive battle. But if we get, for instance, the heat waves that seem to be coming, if people get desperate enough in their daily lives, we've seen this already around the world. Political violence can be labeled terrorism, or it can be labeled resistance. And it depends which end of the gun you're on. It depends how desperate you are to change your conditions, etc. So it's probably a bit much to, there are characters in my book who think of it as the war for the earth. And I think it's not bad to realize that there are people who are already thinking of it that way, and that they might become more numerous as the conditions get more desperate. It could be that 20% of the habitable surface of the earth becomes uninhabitable. It could be that up to 2 billion of our fellow citizens on this planet may have to move or feel impelled to move. And they'll be moving to places where there isn't room for them. So certainly, I mean, the US Pentagon and their studies of the future dangers, etc., the possibility of it turning into war is all too much in our face. So I guess I would say right now it's just a phrase in the discursive battle. We're in a war for the earth. And let's hope it doesn't become literal in the decades to come.
Absolutely, let's hope it. I'm moving away from the book now to an article that you published in the New Yorker, the 1st of May, 2020. The coronavirus is rewriting our imaginations. What felt impossible become thinkable. The spring of 2020 is suggestive of how much and how quickly we can change as a civilization. So we've moved on, 4 or 5 months since that was published. How do you think COVID-19 is going to change the context in which we're trying to make this transition towards a low carbon society?
I'm not sure. It's been a very confusing 6 months. Ever since the moment of the lockdowns in March, I've been stunned at the speed with which things have changed. And I guess what I would hold to from that essay, which I have to say was written in mid-April, is a moment came when science, the scientific community, let's just say science, but it speaks for that community, that network, scientific network of the world, told the governments of the world, we're in radical danger from this pandemic. And I have to insist that the knowledge of the pandemic is a scientific achievement, that no one individual wandering the earth could have told us, oh, there's a pandemic. It could have been misunderstood to be a flu. And in a way it is related to a flu. It's a scientific achievement, as in the awareness of climate change itself. No one individual sees it, but everybody understands that it's real because the scientific community has assembled the data and done the analysis. Then they went to national governments and said, we have these dangers. Well, you could call it an existential danger. It's a physical danger of a mass death, and we therefore have to change. And the whole world changed. So it was a demonstration of what people fundamentally put their faith in terms of who they will trust to act differently. That it was a practical demonstration that almost everybody on the planet, no matter what they say in the discursive battle, believes in science and government. When you're sick, you run to the doctor. And after that, if you then say words that are anti-vax words or whatever, you are still in your fundamental behaviors have demonstrated your strong belief in science being the best chance you have of curing your illness, even though lots of times it can't. It's not magic, but it's the best method that we have. So I thought March, April, May was a spectacular demonstration of cutting through ideologies to get to what people really believe. Well, now, you know, most people haven't died. Some time has passed. And the discursive battle rears its head again, and people will loudly proclaim that their rights allow them to ignore the behaviors that are being suggested, that they modify, etc. And we're back. But I don't think that I'm not sure what will happen going forward. I don't think anybody is. Whether the pandemic will be seen as a blip on the ongoing march of capitalist progress and destruction, or whether it will be seen as a watershed year after which things fundamentally change, it's up to us. No one can say. It's like almost any other major development. It's beyond prediction. And I certainly want to proclaim that even a science fiction writer knows nothing about the future in terms of predicting what will happen, that no one can do that. And science fiction isn't playing that game. And I don't care to play that game. So we're in the thick of it, but I will hold to that one feeling that March, April, May was a spectacular demonstration of humanity's belief in the power of science, and also in getting along by way of the rule of law and by governments. That was impressive.
Mm-hmm. It was impressive, you're dead right. Now, we've just been speaking for more than half an hour, so we do want to give participants time to come in with their comments and their questions. I just have one quick last question before we open to our respondent and then to our participants. And this is a very personal question to you. I suppose more than most of us, you have examined the future, particularly in writing this book. You've examined the distant future in many other books. Are you hopeful, Stan?
Yes, I am hopeful, but let's make it clear that hope is a political position, that it doesn't have to do with analysis or biochemistry. They're involved, but they ultimately aren't the main point. Gramsci picked up an acquaintance's phrase, that pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. I think pessimism and optimism are irrelevant to our decisions of what we do now, because we're in a desperate, all hands on deck situation. So it doesn't matter what I feel. But hopefulness is, well, I've been saying that, look, it's bacterial. I mean to say it's biological right down to the cellular level. The cell goes out there hoping to run into food, to reproduce, to survive. So life hopes. This is a definition of life itself. So hope is maybe a subtle, I mean to say in the political battle, you've got a party of hope against a party of fear. And fear is so immediate and powerful and also biological that you can use it like a club to beat people and get your working majority in the discursive battle. But hope is permanent. It's just like hunger. It is. It can be. If you are reminded of it, if you remember that you're hopeful, you can do. Proust has this phrase: you can hope without hope, and this is typical Proustian subtlety. But I love it quite a lot. I hope without hope, but I also think that it's a political requirement. It's a sort of moral obligation to be hopeful. And people who say that they aren't hopeful, or people who are pessimistic, this is a form of cynicism and defeatism. It's a giving in to the other side of the battle and a loss of a working majority. So it's never a good thing, no matter what your private analysis of the situation is.
A fascinating answer and a fascinating conversation, Stan. Many, many thanks. And I think it's now the time to bring in our Mary Murphy. When we were conceiving of this, we were thinking who would be an ideal respondent. And very quickly, I thought of Professor Mary Murphy, a good friend of ours here in the Ecovillage, who combines many things. She is now an academic, but she has been a policy analyst in the past for the not-for-profit sector, as well as for the public sector, a community activist, a councillor on Dublin City Council, and now a member of the Council of State, appointed by our current president to the Council of State, which advises the president. So when I invited Mary to be your respondent, and when she read the Ministry for the Future, she told me that she had worked in Zurich. She had walked the streets that the fictitious Mary Murphy walked. It actually, in one case, I think, slept in the same place as the fictitious Mary Murphy. So I'll introduce Mary, invite her on, thank her for being with us and for her patience, because I wanted to spring this as a surprise on Stan. So Stan, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Mary Murphy.
Hi Stan, thanks Pader, and hello everybody. I really felt, I was being described sometimes in the book, you described the Mary Murphy, the bureaucrat in charge of the Ministry of the Future, as a middle-class, harried woman. She's hard drinking, she curses, and she's a reputation for taking risks. And I thought, wow. Like me. I actually did work in Candlestick as a chambermaid in a hotel. And I was up at the lake in Ottewinsee and knew the Alpine tunnels and that. So I really enjoyed the book in that sense. But just going back to the conversation that you were just having there, I loved the definition of hope as a political position, and I think it would be very much my own orientation. And I think the whole idea of trying to create a discursive battle and a discursive battle from below that brings with it a critical mass that does get the right side of a majority in terms of political representation, it can only really be built on hope. I think what we're seeing in terms of the political mobilization that's built on fear can be very strong and powerful, but it's not necessarily sustainable. And I do think if we're serious about trying to build political communities for a longer term agenda, that's about trying to create the type of society that we're talking about, that it can only be built on hope in terms of what we stand for rather than what we stand against. And it's very easy to say often what we're against. It's harder sometimes to imagine what we're for. And I found really brilliant about the book, and I really enjoyed it. And even though like some of the start of it is very harrowing, the scene that Pater described, I think it's well worth dragging the reader through that in order to look at the longer term scenario that evolves, where you're trying to imagine in the book how a post-capitalist society might come about, what some of the features of it would be in terms of policy, what some of the political dynamics might be, not so much through the political party or political system, but through the dynamics on the ground. I think the democratic changes that would take place. And I know you don't want to use the word democracy, but the role of protest, the role of direct action terrorism even, you know, in terms of structural violence and things like that. I particularly, as a political economist, I particularly liked your critique of economics from the perspective of money and markets, and your awareness of the social construction of money and markets, and the idea that people could take democratic control of new forms of finance and banking, new forms of democratic banking, combining some of the technologies we already have, like blockchain. I think that's really good. And I think linking it to what you were just talking about there in terms of trying to imagine quantitative easing in a different way around carbon reduction and you know, paying people for doing good things for the earth. I think all of that is quite tangible in the now. And to the degree that COVID teaches us that radical change can happen quickly when the need is realized for it, when political leaders feel emboldened by the consensus that there is for that change in society, I would be hopeful that some of the ideas in the book aren't far-fetched in terms of science fiction, but actually are processes that are in the early stages of being evolved and thought about and designed and imagined by a lot of people. I think that there's a real tension in the book in terms of the idea of how you build a community. And you talk at one stage in the book about, do you need a plan B? Like, do you need to have a model for the future and an agenda that you then gather people around? Or you have a lovely expression about, do you need to cross the river by feeling the stones? And I really liked that expression. And there is that tension to, you're trying to show how communities can be mobilized around common hopes and ideas, that kind of discursive battle. But at the same time, you want that mobilization to create the ideas and to create the discursive battle. And there's a real tension there in chickens and eggs, and to what degree you let the process of mobilization actually generate its own dynamic and constellation of changes that could lead to the post-capitalism that you're describing it. But the book certainly leaves those who are struggling in the now, I think, to try and be part of those processes. It leaves, I felt very encouraged by it, I must say. I felt at the end of it that there was a sense of that it may not happen in the way you describe it, of course, but that could happen. And it gives you that sense of that, you know, there is a longer term context to what's trying to be done. I'm on the board of Oxfam Ireland, a development non-government organisation, and it recently won a big €1 million prize for using blockchain to get money to people in climate change zones in terms of, you know, disaster zones, hurricanes, flooding, through blockchain, monies directly into their mobile phones. So these kind of things are happening all the time. And I do think that the role of women in the book, the role of migrants, the place of migrants in the story of the book, maybe the role that young people might play might have could come out in sub-stories of the book as well. So I think more generally, the who will do the mobilization, where the power below would come from, what will be the critical moments of change is really important. But just going back to the Mary Murphy in the book to finish, because you started out talking about the role of leadership and maybe the function of bureaucrats in leadership. And I think COVID-19 is fascinating in terms of what we see about, for example, the role of female leadership in female prime ministers and presidents around the world, who are creating a different political discourse and communicating different values about how their nations would respond to COVID-19, putting care, for example, much more clearly at the central of their political response to COVID-19. I'm thinking of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand as a good example of that. You mentioned some political leaders yourself, but there's also really clear illustrations in Ireland at the moment about the tension and the relationship between bureaucrats and political leaders, and that's also at the centre of your book as well. And we're seeing that very much in Ireland this week. So overall, I really liked it. You gave me a real sense at the end of the book that even though you put everything on the agenda, political actors, leaders, bureaucrats, war, direct action, terrorism, that at the end of the day, I had a firm sense that you believed that it's the mass, it's the critical mass, it's that working majority of numbers that would get things over the edge, and that's the model of change that you believe in. And I think it's the model of change a lot of people listening are probably working towards, trying to be early leaders in trying to create that agenda change that eventually a critical mass will be behind and will lead to popularising a lot of the ideas that are in the book and that are already a feature of a lot of the Ecovillage and the broader ecosystem around the Ecovillage are already trying to make real. So I really welcomed the book. And can I just end maybe by just, Peter mentioned about bookshops and relocalising. And I do think right now it is really important that we use this time we have. There's the sense of, will COVID be the moment at which we do see some paradigm change, or will it push us back to normal? I think we need to really take control of the agenda as much as we can. And I think relocalising bookshops is a great place to start. Sheila a gig there in Cloughjordan, but great bookshops like Books and Coffee in Kilkenny, university bookshops as well. You know, it really, we as consumers have so much power not to really make the richest man in the world even richer.
So used for bad causes like the Koch brothers, it shouldn't exist. Lessons from the past, well, it's really all we've got. I'm super interested in it. I think history is fascinating. It can be deployed by analogy in the current discursive battle, but we are in a weirdly unprecedented situation. And I've had occasion to reflect that every moment in history probably felt unprecedented to the people living in it. And I think that's right. But what I've been saying is that it's more unprecedented than ever before, the situation that we're in. So you end up having to fight by using the analogies from the past that seem relevant and useful. But we are in new territory now. We've never had this much power. We've never created this much damage. And the combination is terrifying, but the possibility for getting to a good space, to in fact permaculture. I love this word permaculture, this concept, the practice of it. I am a gardener, an organic gardener in my village, and I'm terrible at it, but I understand the principles involved, and it's work intensive, it's immensely good for one's sanity. It's exactly the opposite of being a billionaire. When you do permaculture, you feel that you're grounded in a physical and moral and spiritual way. And it works for sustainability over the long haul. So I'm always encouraging, UC Davis is one of the great agricultural colleges on this earth. And so I'm always talking to the people there, the professors, and trying to get them to pay more attention to organic and sustainable permaculture practices. And it's getting traction because it's the necessary thing. Briefly, the heavy lift boosters, I love space program. Space science is an earth science, and it's my expert friends at JPL and elsewhere that tell me that there's so much room on the earth for solar panels that you don't need to go to the expense and the technical difficulties to put these solar panels in space. That's not the best way to use our space program. There are other better ways. Mostly, I think, studying the Earth and giving us the information that we need from space to help manage this planet better. And every time you talk about the space program, it reminds us we are on a planet. We're on a very thin skin of a planet, and it's the only one that we can live on. So the more we know about the rest of the planets, the more we know about our planet as a planet, the better off we're going to be going forward. And that brings me back, I think, to, although I want to say hi to Simon Spiegel as well, and I have focused on economics as my, my future science of interest. But thanks to Mary Murphy, it was a huge pleasure to think of your Swiss experiences and you reading this book. It must have been weird. I'm happy to know, and I'm glad that you're working with Oxfam and your career in Dublin and for the state. It's a beautiful thought. I know Rita Caldwell, who was director of NSF, she's read about Diane Chang in My Science in the Capital trilogy, and I think she understands, and I think you understand. I mean, I don't know anything about you. These characters are inventions, but what I'm quite certain of is that good work is being done, hard work, absorbing work, by people all over, and these are the ones that are, it should be the protagonists of novels. That novels tend to, naturally enough, focus on problems. A novel is when things go wrong. That's a plot. Things go wrong. So okay, they often get melodramatic, and this comes out of TV and out of the movies. So the origin of the novel was to actually get ordinary people and real lives into storytelling, so it isn't just epics and fables. So the novel still does that work, and it just makes me happy to think that there's a Mary Murphy, and there's many other Marys and people doing the good work. And I want to thank you for that, because a lot of this good work is undercompensated and a pain in the ass, and people complain, and it's essentially public service. It's done for other people as a kind of moral obligation. In other words, it feels good because it's good work, and so I want to thank you for that. And actually, that's a more general thanks, but to Mary in particular.
I thank Stan, and I'm inviting in Professor Tom Moylan to give some closing reflections. Tom is Glucksmann Professor Emeritus at the University of Limerick, and of course founder of the Rallahine Centre for Utopian Studies. His book, Demand the Impossible, Science Fiction and the Utopian Imagination, has been issued in a second edition. It, I suppose, sums up the way in which he has brought science fiction and utopian studies together. He's a good friend of us in the Ecovillage. He has taught courses to students from the University of Limerick here in the Ecovillage on utopian communities. And his forthcoming book, due to be published in November, Becoming Utopian, the Culture and Politics of Radical Transformation, which we really look forward to. So Tom, I'm delighted to invite you to offer final reflections on our webinar.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Davey, for organizing this. Stan, it's great to see you again, and it's great to be with this group. Once more, we're at the work, the real work, as Gary Snyder calls it. I guess I want to simply start by saying thank you again to you, Stan, for the work that you have done in the past and the work that you continue to do. I first knew you as a science fiction writer and saw you not grow, but fulfill further into being a political thinker. And I, have written this about you, that you are one of our public intellectuals. Noam Chomsky complained a long time ago that we don't have enough of them, and we don't, but you are a global public intellectual, and I would add a utopian public intellectual, or a utopian intellectual, not in the wrong sense of utopia that most people get, but the sense of it being a robustly radical way of understanding the present in terms of a future that may or may not happen. What's important to stress is that you work in the medium of science fiction. And you've talked about that, other people have talked about that in the discussion. And science fiction is a way, as you will show us in all your books, but especially maybe in Ministry, of cognitively mapping the present. There's a lot said about realism, there's a lot said about empiricism, there's a lot said about looking at how things are in a commonsensical way. And The trouble with empirical realism, or capitalist realism, as Mark Fisher calls it, is that it only sees the tree and doesn't see the forest. Science fiction has a way of looking at the totality, and you certainly do that in large scope and in small scope. You see the problems of the world we live in, and you see the possibilities, or what Ernst Bloch would call the tendencies and the latencies of what could happen. And it's important to stress that this is not something about a future that may one day happen. This is about the present that we're living and struggling in. And you're tracing out possibilities for how we may go forward. And what a book like Ministry does, as all your book, is offer another weapon of criticism, as Norman Rudich put it a long time ago, I really liked your term, discursive battle. And I've said this to you, Ministry, to me, Ministry is a compendium for our time. It's essays, it's scientific analyses, it's economic analyses, and it's very important, rich, personal narration. All comes together in its own totality and gives us a way of understanding this world, which in our daily lives, we don't always see. We see facets of it. We live parts of it. The great thing about a science fictional imagination is that it can open us up to a bigger sense of that situation. And I just really want to reiterate some of the things that have been said already, the rich vision of your systemic analysis, not just of hard science technologies, but the very interesting description of the technology of finance and the possibilities for alternative forms of financial instruments, important ways of using the law and using the legislative system as weapons for a better world. And I say this the day after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and rest in peace and power to her. And we are facing now a battle for the Supreme Court of the US as we go into this next election. The law is too easily set aside sometimes by people on the streets. And that leads me to the next part, the political vision, the way you connect the bottom up and the top down, the way your total vision includes both. We have to have people on the street. We have to have radical change inside of ourselves, inside of our own lives. And that's what I've been writing about in Becoming Utopian, how the individual break happens to make us truly radical, not in the way that popular media deals with that term, but in the way the great American tradition of radicalism dealt with it. That we need this totalizing approach in the way we do our finances, the way we do our science, the way we do our economy, the way we do our law and politics, but also the way in which we live our daily lives. And that leads me to your very important sense of nature. We didn't talk a lot about this today, but it certainly needs to be said in the context of the Ecovillage. Because the way you envision nature, and I think the way I would guess most of us here today would, is that we're all part of it. We are of nature, we are nature. We're not outside exploiters or users, nor are we stewards of something out there. We are, maybe fortunately or not fortunately, a self-conscious species with our fellow creatures in nature. And Donna Haraway has done very good things writing about our sense of being fellow creatures or critters, as she so well puts it. And to get back to Haraway, you don't look to a future solution, you look to the present. You look to what she has called us to do, to stay with the trouble, to immerse ourselves in these hard times and to find ways forward. Understanding fully the system, and you contribute to those discursive tools for understanding the system. So to me, the systemic vision of the book, the deeper qualities of the book are important, but the strongest part to me always is the question of the person and the personal activist. What are each of us called to do in this terrible world in which we live? What are each of us called to do, not just individually, but with each other, and importantly with each other? How do we live in this war for the earth? And I think I would agree that it is a war. Whether it uses nonviolence or counter-violence or whatever are things we're really going to have to struggle for. And I think your portrayal of the very difficult situation of the children of Kali is a deep shift in your writing that causes us to think deeply. But how do we think about the world? How do we live in the world? And that brings me to the thing I want to end with, and that's your comment on hope. That hope is not an abstract entity. It's not an abstract category. It's not, as some would have argued, a useless category, but it is a driving political position, as you call it. It's a standpoint. It's a standpoint against nihilism, against resignation. It's a standpoint against arrogant, selfish, exploitive power. And what your writing does and what your speaking does as an engaged intellectual is to constantly help us see or recognize those traces of hope and to bring them down to earth, to our earth, and to make them live in each of our lives as we work together now for, hopefully, a better future. So again and again, Stan, I want to thank you.
Tom, thank you so much for that reflection. It's a nice segue in what we're going to end on now, which is the launch of Communities for Future. So the Cloughjordan Ecovillage and many of the learning providers in Cloughjordan Ecovillage cultivate are very engaged at a European level as well as the local level. And one of the things that we've been, one of the networks, meta-networks we're working through is Equalise. And I'm going to hand over to Iva Pocock, who's the communications manager at Equalise, to introduce us to Communities for Future.
Thanks, Davey. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so just to, I suppose today is the European Day of Sustainable Communities, which is one of the flagship initiatives of Equalise. Equalise is the European network, it's quite a mouthful, the European network for community-led initiatives on climate change and sustainability. It's a network that's 5 years old. It brings together broadly the transition network movement, permaculture and eco-villages, as well as researchers and specialist educational people, the likes of Cultivate here in the Ecovillage. And so today we're marking not just the European Day of Sustainable Communities, which this year is happening, I think, in about 17 countries across Europe. Last year it happened in 27 countries. Many of the events that are happening are online for obvious reasons. But we're really delighted that we are launching our new action program called Communities for Future. Communities for Future, the idea, I suppose, emerged a year ago, very much around the time of the real impact of Fridays for Future and Greta Thunberg, and a meeting that we had in Brussels, and one of our council members, a young German woman, had come up with this idea, Communities for Future. So here we are a year later, and Communities for Future is very much about trying to mainstream and bring to policymakers awareness the amazing work that has been going on for decades in the likes of eco-villages, in permaculture projects, through the Transition Towns network. So what we're trying to do here, I suppose, we're not talking about the seeds of change coming out of these movements, but really the seedlings. That was the analogy that we came up with, that these initiatives have been going for so many years now that we really do have many of the answers that we need, obviously in conjunction with radical change from the top level in terms of economics and finance. So Communities for Future, if you just go back to that slide, Davey, what we're trying to do with Communities for Future is share stories, the stories that are happening all across Europe, indeed all across the world. Share stories of communities to inspire people. Resources, the kind of resources that are coming out of our movements of how to organise in your community and how to start making a difference at local level. Events such as this, events where people can come together, an online space where people can collaborate, and obviously access to contacts and to meeting people within the wider movement. We have a new website called communitiesforfuture.org. I invite you to have a look at it. It's currently only in English, but it will be translated into many languages, like our European Day website, which is linked from it. So I'd just like to invite you now to look at a little video we've been putting together over the last few weeks. Features an amazing colleague of mine called Mira Ghani, who is a climate and community activist, originally from Pakistan, based in Brussels. So please follow us on social media, check out the website, share your stories, and thank you for your attention.
Renewable energy, growing food, nurturing local economies. Responding creatively to the climate and ecological emergencies is the biggest challenge of our time. Throughout Europe, local communities are pioneering a better future, from community gardens to eco-villages, permaculture projects, and transition initiatives. They are building a healthier, fairer, and more sustainable world. This is why Communities for Future was born, to share these experiences, to inspire you and your community to take action. So how can we help? By sharing tools and resources, such as guides, manuals, podcasts, and an online space. And also with different events where you can meet and learn from others. And finally, contact. Communities for Future connects you with many other organizations to help support you and your community. Communities for Future is bringing together people from all across Europe. So what do you think? Join the thousands of communities across Europe working together to create a happier, fairer, and more sustainable future. Together, we can build a better world.
So that was Mira. It was filmed just a couple of weeks ago in one of my favorite community initiatives. It's called Champs des Cailles, the fields of the I've forgotten which bird it is actually in French. It's in Brussels, and it's the most incredible place. It's a community farm right in the heart of Brussels. So please follow us, Communities for Future. Thank you. Davey.
Brilliant, Iva. So that brings us to an end there. We have reflected a little on the work of Kim Stanley Robinson, especially his views on how we address the urgency of the ecological and climate emergency that we face. It was a lovely conversation, and thanks for your insights in the chat, everyone. Thanks for coming. Pader and Stan, thank you so much. It was really insightful. Mary, your reflection then I thought brought a lot more to it, and it's a great little connection to the character in the book and yourself. And Tom Moylan, again, you've been a good friend to us here in the Ecovillage, looking at how we interpret that utopian framework, and thanks for the work that you do. So before we close, I just want to really thank again Kim Stanley Robinson. We get to call him Stan, as he's become a good friend and a visitor here. He's even stayed with us. So Stan, we wish you the very best with the new publication and managing over the next month in your home country. I'm sure it's difficult. Our sympathies are with you, our strength. Yeah. So thank you, and thank you all. Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Pader, Mary, Tom, Iva. Do check out the Communities of Future. do check out the Ecovillage that Veronica introduced earlier, thevillage.ie, and make sure that you order. The book is due out in October, this next month. Order from your independent bookshops or Sheila Gig, our bookshop in Cloughjordan. So with that, I'd just like to, again, just say thank you, tune in, come and visit when it's safe, and keep doing what you are doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Tom. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all. Thanks, Stan.